Hi there. This is for my friend Allison, who wants me to show her how to cast on to a long circular needle so that you can knit 2 socks at one time. So I have a very long needle. It doesn't have to be this long. This is 100 centimeters, I think. But anyway, here's my needle. And I don't have to use double pointed. Here's the needle and the long cable. Anyway, here, this is a very easy way to start the toe of your sock. And so I have, here I'll pretend I'm knitting 2 different colored socks just so you can see the difference. Start off by putting a slip knot in the end of each of your colors before you start casting on. That'll help. And then what you do is I'll take the light blue one and I will slip it on to one of the needles. Then I'll take my next needle, the other end of the long cable, and I will try to get that the extra long cable makes it a bit fussy to work with, but I'll hold on to the tail to secure my loop from moving up and down the needle, and I'll align the 2 needles. Just disregard that cable that keeps popping up in there. And then what I want to do is just wind on, twist on to the needles the yarn, but making just like a little figure 8. So I'm trying to do this midair. My arms are getting tired, so things are shaking all over the place. But I'll just twist and twist. So 2, 4, 2, 4. I'll put 5 stitches on each needle. And we'll just take a look at that. So you can see I've got 5 stitches on the top and 5 on the bottom. Yeah, it's not pretty because I've done this a couple times here now with the yarn. Getting kind of kinky. So now I'm going to slide those down near the base of the needle, and there I've already tied my slip knot, so I am on my second ball of yarn. So again, I started on the lower needle, so I'm going to put that on and tighten that up, snug it up a bit. And then I'm going to wrap around just like a figure 8, over and under, loop the loo. And I'm doing this, as I'm doing this, I'm counting the number of times I want to make the stitches match. So in this case, I'm going to do 5. For my friend Allison, I think you probably did 9. Do you have your notes that you started with? But anyway, you can check it out. So notice that each of these is independent sock toes. Don't think of toes like 5 toes, but so independent socks. So that's how we're going to be knitting them side by side on the needle. Sorry, I might have been off screen a little bit there. And so now what I'm going to do is my last stitch went on the top needle. So I'm going to just secure that with my finger. And I'm going to pull the top needle through. I'm holding the other stitches, so those other stitches go on my cable part. And then I'm going to kind of twist so that my needle is on the top. And I have 2, 4, 5, so I'll just make sure that 5th one, I have to go over there, make sure I got 5 loops on top and 5 on bottom. And I'm just going to knit in through these first stitches on this first needle to do the first half of the first row. So notice there's a big gap here, and what I'm going to do is put my needle behind that and pick up in the back of that stitch and knit through the back of the stitch. So it's putting a little bit of a twist on. So there's a big gap, so I'm going to go behind that, twist as I knit, and there's the second stitch. Big gap, go behind and twist, knit into the back of the stitch, put a bit of a twist, and then same thing all the way to the end where I have my slip knot. I don't have to twist that one. I'll just knit into that. So there's my first sock. I did the first half of the row. The other half of the row we'll knit on our way back. That's why it's called the endless loop, I guess. You keep going in a loop. So here we have 5 stitches on the top, 5 on the bottom. I usually do an odd number when I'm knitting my socks and starting off. Just that's the way I am, odd. And so because of the big gap, we'll knit through the back of that loop. Big gap, so knit through the back. And I'll just do this all the way to the end. Make sure you have 5. If you don't have 5 or the right number of stitches when you get to the end, just knit twice into that last loop. There we go. Socks are both separate because I knit with separate tails. That's really important. Make sure when you end one sock that you're dropping that yarn and then picking up the yarn of the second sock. So now I'm going to drop my other needle, switch it around, and then I'll find the loop of the cable and I'll just pull it through to advance so that I get the stitches that are on the cable up to the bottom of this needle. Now, at this point, I pull the other needle out so that it gives me a bit more room to slide these other stitches. I'll try to get the yarn out of the way onto this needle. Okay, so this thread is the yarn end, so I don't want to worry about that. I'll take from the slip knot. I'll take the yarn coming off the ball and go into my first stitch. It's a big gap, so remember this time I'm going to knit through the front of the stitch just because that's how it's going to work better on this side. Big gap, so I'll knit through the front of the stitch. Big gap, so I'll knit through the front of the stitch. Careful not to split. Big gap. Now look at, I've only got 4 on this side. I must have not looped my tail around, so I'm going to knit twice into this stitch. So don't worry about if you're short one, but do count and make sure your socks match. It's always good to have matching socks, even though I'm knitting one dark blue and one in light blue. Not really, just for the purposes of this recording. Okay, so I'll let the little tail hang down from the slip knot, and I'll get my dark blue sock yarn ready to go. Now it's a big gap, so I'm going to knit through the front of this stitch. Big gap, so I'll knit through the front, twisting it, whatever works. If it's going to, this way seems to be going through the front, makes sense. Other times it's going through the back. On this sock, I've got 5. Woohoo, magic number 5. So I don't know if you can see or not, but there's a nice little kind of twisty, slanted stitch going on there. And that's what I really like about this cast on, is you don't have any sewing to do and you're knitting on one needle. So it's like knitting with mittens on strings. You never lose a needle. So I'm going to pull the loop through that I just had knit from. Again, pull out the needle that I was just knitting those stitches on, move my other stitches forward. And now it's a matter of knitting the second row of the sock. For the toes of the socks, until I get it to the width that I want, I'll knit the first stitch. Then I'm going to pick up the strand between the first and the second stitch. I'm going to put it on the needle tip, and I'm going to do this little twist in it, and then, whoops, and then knit that twisted stitch, and that's called a make one. So I made one extra stitch, and then I'm just going to knit all the other stitches to the last stitch. Don't knit the last one, because we want to do an increase by making one between the, using that strand between the last 2 stitches. So I'm going to pick it up, put it on the needle tip, and twist it around. So it's kind of twisting that, you know, don't get a hole then, and knit my last stitch. There's the second row. Now I'm going to drop that tail from the dark sock ball and proceed with the light sock ball. So I'm going to knit the first stitch. I'm going to pick up the strand between the first and second, get it kind of snug here, twist it around. So I'm making a stitch, and every single row on both sides, you're going to keep making a stitch until you get it to the width of what you want. And it depends on how wide your foot is. I'm going to make one here. I'm at the second last one. And it depends on the thickness of your yarn. If I'm using sock yarn for my width of my foot, I generally go to, I think it's 37 stitches. But for my husband's foot, his is wider, so I go more. So you just have to kind of play around with it. Hopefully, Allison, you remember how many stitches there were that you cast on for your sock when you had started it. First set of socks. Okay, I'm going to pull that needle through, and then again, I'm knitting with the light blue tail, so I want to be sure that's clear. And I'm going to pick up a stitch and make it between those two, twisting it. I know this looks a little awkward, but it really is easy when you do it time and time and time again. It's my favorite way of knitting socks. Second last stitch, so I'm gonna pick up the loop there. I think that's where I made my stitch, if I'm not mistaken. Or it might have been, oops, that might have been the slip knot one. Make a stitch. Now, always count that you have the same amount of stitches on each needle. That's important, and that's how you know you've completed the increase row. And you just keep knitting like that, sliding along. Don't cross your tails. And I don't want to knit with the short little tail. Put that behind. I'll knit with the tail coming off of the ball. You may have to untwist the threads coming off of the balls. They'll get twisted as you knit around socks unless you keep them in order. And essentially that's it. Once you get to the number of stitches that you want to have for the width of your foot after you increase on the toes, then you just keep knitting up in the round until you get to the heel. But this is, oops, I just dropped a stitch, so I'll pick it up. This is such a great method. Sorry if that was out of focus. And if you're leaving your knitting, I just tend to pull my cable so I get it up, the stitches up to the needle, and then pull the other needle through and just leave it like that, and they don't fall off then. So it's not pretty looking, but that's essentially how you can knit two socks on one needle and how I bind on for the toes. And it doesn't look all that fabulous here, but once you wash up the socks and that, it looks great. And that is how I do it. Hope this helps you, Allison. Bye.